The distant wail of a coyote echoed across the Montana territory as Nathan Ingram stood before the fresh grave, his calloused fingers clutching his worn hat against his chest, while the preacher's final words disappeared into the wind like whispers. It was 1872, and at 32 years old, Nathan had just buried Catherine, his wife of 8 years, taken by a fever that swept through the settlement like wildfire, leaving nothing but grief in its wake. Lord, receive Catherine Ingram into your embrace, Preacher Williams concluded, his voice breaking slightly against the bitter October wind. The small gathering of neighbors and townsfolk from nearby Silver Ridge began to disperse, offering quiet condolences that Nathan barely heard. His eyes remained fixed on the wooden cross, Catherine's name carved with painstaking care by his own hand. Their dreams of building a life together, raising children on his modest cattle ranch, all buried beneath the freshly turned earth. You need anything, Nathan, you just let us know, Sheriff Tanner said, placing a firm hand on Nathan's shoulder. Nathan nodded without speaking. Words seemed pointless now. What could anyone say to fill the emptiness that had taken residence in his chest? Later that evening, as darkness settled over his cabin, Nathan sat alone at the table they had built together, a half-empty bottle of whiskey his only companion. He pulled out the small daguerreotype of Catherine, her gentle smile, her eyes bright with promise. I won't do this again, he whispered to the empty room, a vow forming in the depths of his broken heart. No more loving, no more losing. Winter came harsh that year, burying the Montana landscape under a blanket of unforgiving white. Nathan threw himself into his work, expanding the small cattle operation, building new fences, anything to exhaust his body enough that sleep might come without dreams of Catherine. He took his meals alone, spoke only when necessary during his infrequent trips to town, and refused all invitations for Sunday dinners or gatherings. By spring of 1873, the people of Silver Ridge had come to understand Nathan Ingram was a changed man, still fair and honest in business, still willing to lend a hand when needed, but closed off, as though a part of him remained buried in the small cemetery at the edge of his property. The ranch prospered despite his solitude, perhaps because of it. Without the distraction of social obligations or companionship, Nathan devoted himself entirely to his work. His herd grew, and he hired 2 cowboys, Hank, a gruff older man who asked few questions, and Joey, barely 20 and eager to learn. They maintained a respectful distance, understanding instinctively that their employer valued competence over conversation. Summer faded into autumn, and autumn gave way to another winter. Nathan marked the anniversary of Catherine's death with a bottle and a night spent staring into the fire, remembering the sound of her laughter. Morning brought another day of work, another reason to keep moving forward. It was early April 1874 when a late-season blizzard descended upon the territory without warning. Nathan and his men had been working the northern pasture when the temperature dropped suddenly, the sky darkening to an ominous gray. By the time they started back toward the ranch house, visibility had reduced to mere feet in front of them. You boys head straight to the bunkhouse, Nathan shouted over the howling wind. Don't try to do anything else tonight. They separated at the fork in the trail, Nathan continuing alone toward the main house. The snow was falling so heavily now that he could barely make out the lantern he'd left burning in the window. He was nearly to the porch when he heard a sound so unexpected that he stopped, certain his mind was playing tricks. A child's cry, carried on the wind. Nathan turned, squinting into the swirling white. Nothing but darkness and snow. He took another step toward his door, then heard it again, not imagination, but a real, desperate sound. Hello, he called, his voice swallowed by the storm. When no answer came, he grabbed the lantern from its hook by the door and ventured back into the blizzard, following the direction of the sound. 20 yards from his house, the light fell upon a sight that stopped his heart. A wagon, its wheel broken, nearly buried in snowdrift. Beside it, huddled together in a futile attempt to shield themselves from the elements, were 3 figures, a woman and 2 small children. Dear God, Nathan breathed, rushing forward. The woman looked up at his approach, her face pale with cold, but her eyes fierce with determination. She clutched the children, a boy of perhaps 6 and a girl who couldn't be more than 4, to her sides. Please, she said, her voice barely audible above the storm. My children. Nathan didn't hesitate. He scooped the little girl into one arm, offered his hand to the boy, and nodded for the woman to follow. My house is just there, he shouted. Can you walk? She nodded, struggling to her feet. Nathan noticed her wince as she put weight on her right ankle, but she didn't complain, keeping one hand on her son's shoulder as they fought their way through the deepening snow toward the light of Nathan's home. Once inside, Nathan quickly built up the fire while the woman helped the children out of their frozen outer garments. Thank you, she said, her voice steadier now but trembling with cold. I thought we were going to die out there. What in God's name are you doing traveling in this weather? Nathan asked, harsher than he'd intended, anxiety making his tone sharp. We didn't have a choice, she replied, straightening her back despite her obvious exhaustion. I'm Rebecca Taylor. These are my children, William and Emma. Nathan nodded, suddenly aware of the state of his home, sparse, functional, with no trace of comfort or welcome. It had been a long time since he'd had visitors, let alone a family with small children. Nathan Ingram, he said simply. You're hurt. Rebecca glanced down at her ankle. It's nothing serious. The wheel broke, and I twisted it trying to fix it. The little girl, Emma, had begun to whimper, her small face still pinched with cold. Are you hungry? Nathan asked, directing the question to the children. William nodded eagerly, though he remained pressed against his mother's side. Nathan moved to the stove, grateful he had a pot of stew left from his supper. As he worked, he listened to Rebecca speaking softly to her children, reassuring them with a steady calm that spoke of long practice. Where are you headed? He asked as he placed bowls before them. Rebecca hesitated, something flashing in her eyes, pride, perhaps, or shame. Billings. My sister is there. After my husband died last fall, we tried to make it on our own in our homestead near Bozeman, but... She trailed off, her gaze dropping to her children. The winter was hard. We ran out of food. Our neighbors helped when they could, but everyone was struggling. Nathan understood then the gauntness of her face, the two thin frames of the children. They weren't just cold, they were starving. You're welcome to stay until the storm passes, he said, though the thought of sharing his home, even temporarily, made his chest tighten with anxiety. The northern bedroom has a bed big enough for the three of you. Relief flooded Rebecca's face. We won't be a burden, she promised. Once the weather clears, we'll be on our way. That night, after his unexpected guests had settled into Catherine's old sewing room, a room he hadn't entered in nearly 2 years, Nathan sat before the fire, unsettled by the presence of others in his carefully maintained solitude. The sounds of life, children's whispers, a mother's gentle shushing echoed through his empty house, awakening memories he'd fought to suppress. The storm lasted 3 days, trapping them all inside. By the second day, Nathan had discovered that 6-year-old William was fascinated by horses and could ask more questions in an hour than Nathan had heard in the past year. 4-year-old Emma was shy but would break into unexpected giggles that transformed her solemn little face. And Rebecca was a force of nature, determined to earn her keep despite Nathan's protests. You're injured, he argued when he found her in the kitchen on the second morning, preparing breakfast with supplies she'd found in his pantry. It's just a sprain, and it's already improving, she replied, her hands continuing to work as she spoke. I won't sit idle while you feed and shelter us. Nathan recognized the pride in her stance, the dignity that wouldn't allow her to be merely a recipient of charity. So he nodded and let her cook, surprised by how the simple pancakes she made tasted better than anything he'd eaten in months. By the time the storm cleared on the 4th day, Nathan had reluctantly grown accustomed to the noise and activity that filled his home. When he went to inspect Rebecca's wagon, however, he found the damage worse than expected. The axles cracked, he informed her as they stood in the knee-deep snow. It'll need to be replaced, not just repaired. Rebecca's face fell. How long will that take? I'll need to send Joey into town for parts once the road's clear. Could be a week, maybe more. She bit her lip, clearly calculating something in her mind. We can't impose on you that long. You're not imposing, Nathan said, surprising himself with the truth of it. Besides, there's nowhere else for you to go until the wagon's fixed. That afternoon, Nathan found William in the barn, staring wide-eyed at the horses. The boy jumped when he noticed Nathan, clearly expecting to be scolded for wandering. Sorry, sir, he said quickly. Mama said I could look if I didn't touch anything. Something in the boy's earnest expression reminded Nathan of himself at that age, curious, eager to learn, longing for approval. Without thinking, he asked, "Would you like to help me feed them?" William's face lit up with such joy that Nathan felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. By the end of the week, a routine had developed. Rebecca cooked and mended clothes, insisting it was the least she could do. Nathan taught William about the horses and found himself smiling at Emma's delight when he carved her a small wooden horse. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, the children listening wide-eyed as Nathan reluctantly shared stories of cattle drives and the early days of the territory. One night, after the children had gone to bed, Rebecca remained by the fire, her hands busy with mending one of William's shirts. "You're good with them," she said quietly. "They've taken to you." Nathan shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. "They're good kids." "They are," she agreed. Then after a pause, "You never had children of your own?" The question hit like a physical blow. "No," he said shortly. "My wife and I. We were hoping, but then she got sick." Understanding dawned in Rebecca's eyes. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked." "It's been almost 2 years," Nathan said, as if that explained everything. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "James, my husband, died of pneumonia last October. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times, it feels like a lifetime ago." Nathan found himself nodding. "Does it get easier?" she asked, vulnerability in her question. "Not easier," he replied honestly. "Just different. You learn to carry it." Their eyes met across the room, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. The wagon parts arrived the following week, but a string of spring storms delayed repairs further. Nathan found he didn't mind. The children had begun to help with small chores, William proudly feeding the chickens, Emma helping to gather eggs with careful concentration. Rebecca's ankle had healed, and she moved about the house with increasing confidence, her touch transforming the stark spaces into something that felt dangerously like a home. One evening in late April, Nathan returned from checking the herd to find Rebecca standing in Catherine's garden, the patch of earth he'd let go to weeds after her death. "I hope you don't mind," Rebecca said when she noticed him. "I saw some perennials trying to come up through the weeds, and I thought, well, it seemed a shame to let them struggle." Nathan stared at the freshly turned soil, the neat rows where Rebecca had clearly spent hours working. He should have felt anger, or at least irritation at her presumption. Instead, he felt a curious sense of rightness. "Catherine loved that garden," he said, the words emerging before he could stop them. "She used to say that in a land this wild, there was something powerful about creating a small piece of order and beauty." Rebecca smiled softly. "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Nathan agreed, then added, "she would have liked you." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. May arrived with warming temperatures and greening pastures. The wagon was finally repaired, sitting ready by the barn. Nathan found himself inventing reasons why the journey to Billings should be delayed. The roads weren't fully dry yet. A wheel needed tightening. The children needed more time to regain their strength. The truth, which he barely admitted to himself, was that he couldn't bear the thought of the empty house that awaited him after their departure. One afternoon, he found Rebecca sitting on the porch, a letter in her hands, her expression troubled. "Bad news?" he asked, settling beside her. She sighed. "It's from my sister. Her husband lost his job at the lumber mill. They've moved into a smaller place, just one room. She says they can still take us in, but—" She folded the letter carefully. "It would be very cramped, and they're struggling themselves." Nathan was silent, turning over her words, feeling a dangerous hope rising within him. "Rebecca," he said finally, her name still new on his tongue. "You could stay here." She looked at him, surprise, and something else, something warmer in her eyes. "What?" "The children are happy here. You've made a place for yourselves. And I—" He hesitated, the words difficult after so long. "I've grown accustomed to having you all around." It was an understatement, and they both knew it. "Nathan," she said gently, "we can't keep imposing on your charity." "It wouldn't be charity," he replied, gathering his courage. "The ranch is doing well, but it's growing too big for just me and the hands. I could use help, real help, with the accounts, the planning. You've already shown you have a head for business with the suggestions you made about the cattle sales. Hope flickered in her expression, quickly replaced by caution. As your employee, you mean? Nathan took a deep breath. As my partner, if you wanted. The house is big enough for all of us. The children could have their own rooms. You'd have security, a home. A business arrangement, she clarified, her eyes searching his. Nathan held her gaze. For now, I made a vow, Rebecca, when Catherine died. I swore I'd never marry again, never risk that kind of loss. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But these past weeks, having you and the children here, it's shown me there might be a different kind of life possible. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. I won't pretend that security isn't tempting, she said finally. The children need stability, and they've bloomed here. But I won't enter into an arrangement based on convenience or pity. It's neither, Nathan assured her quickly. I respect you, Rebecca. Your strength, your dignity, the way you've cared for your children through impossible circumstances. And they're remarkable because of you. She smiled slightly at that. Let me think about it, she said. It's a big decision. That night, Nathan couldn't sleep. He stood at his window, looking out at the moonlit landscape of his ranch, the land that had been his sole focus and comfort for nearly 2 years. Somewhere in the past weeks, without his noticing, the empty spaces had begun to fill again with William's eager questions, Emma's soft laughter, Rebecca's quiet strength. He'd meant what he said about a business arrangement, about partnership. But in the darkness of his room, he could admit to himself that something more had begun to grow in his heart, something he'd believed dead and buried alongside Catherine. Morning found him in the barn, methodically brushing down his favorite mare, trying to calm his thoughts. He didn't hear Rebecca approach until she spoke. The children are still sleeping, she said, stepping into the golden light filtering through the barn doors. Nathan turned, his heart quickening at the sight of her hair loose around her shoulders, eyes clear with decision. I've been thinking about your proposal, she continued, moving closer. A partnership, security for my children, a home, and, he asked, his voice rougher than intended. And I've decided that I would be a fool to refuse, she said, a small smile playing at her lips. But Nathan, I need to be honest with you. I'm not looking for a marriage of convenience or a business arrangement where we politely share space, but lead separate lives. Nathan set down the brush, giving her his full attention. What are you looking for, Rebecca? A chance, she said simply. A chance for something real to grow between us, if it can. I don't expect declarations of love. I know your heart still belongs partly to Catherine, just as mine will always hold a place for James. But I believe there could be something good here, something true. The courage in her words humbled him. Here was a woman who had lost everything yet still dared to hope, to reach for happiness instead of mere survival. I buried my wife and vowed never to marry again, Nathan said quietly. I meant it at the time. I thought loving meant inevitable loss, and I couldn't bear that pain twice in one lifetime. Rebecca nodded, understanding in her eyes. But these past weeks, he continued, watching you with the children, seeing how you face each day with such grace and determination, I've begun to wonder if perhaps the greater risk is in never loving at all. He took a step toward her, then another, until they stood face to face in the gentle morning light. I can't promise I'll be good at this, he admitted. It's been a long time since I've opened my heart to anyone. Rebecca's smile deepened. We'll learn together, then. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, Nathan reached for her hand. Her fingers were strong and calloused from hard work, yet they fit perfectly within his own. The days stretched into weeks, and weeks into months. The arrangement began as Nathan had proposed, Rebecca keeping the accounts, organizing supplies, bringing order to the business side of the ranch while caring for the children. Nathan taught William to ride and found unexpected joy in the boy's growing confidence. Emma followed Nathan like a shadow, her initial shyness replaced by a fierce attachment that squeezed his heart with its trust and innocence. By midsummer, the garden Rebecca had reclaimed was flourishing, vibrant with vegetables and flowers. The house, once a monument to Nathan's grief, had transformed under her care, curtains at the windows, children's drawings pinned to walls, the smell of fresh bread, and the sound of laughter filling rooms that had been silent for too long. And between Nathan and Rebecca, something was growing too tentative at first, a careful friendship built on respect and shared purpose. They talked in the evenings after the children were asleep, sharing stories of their lives before loss had reshaped them. Nathan learned that Rebecca had been a schoolteacher before marrying James, that she loved poetry and could recite Tennyson from memory. She discovered his dry sense of humor, his passion for breeding better cattle, his secret talent for sketching landscapes. Their first kiss happened on a warm August evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. It was gentle, questioning, a beginning rather than a destination. When they drew apart, Nathan saw in Rebecca's eyes the same wonder he felt, that healing was possible, that hearts could expand to hold both grief and new joy. By Christmas of 1874, the transformation was complete. The house blazed with light and warmth as neighbors gathered to celebrate the first social gathering Nathan had hosted since Catherine's death. William proudly showed off the calf Nathan had helped him raise, while Emma enchanted everyone with her recitation of "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." Later, after the guests had departed and the children were nestled in their beds, Nathan led Rebecca to the fire and knelt before her. "I made a vow once," he said, taking her hands in his, "that I thought would define the rest of my life. I was wrong." Rebecca's eyes shimmered in the firelight. "Nathan, you and the children brought me back to life," he continued. "You showed me that loving again doesn't diminish what Catherine and I shared, it honors it. She would have wanted this for me, for us." From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold band. "Rebecca Taylor, will you marry me? Not for convenience or security, but because I have fallen deeply, irrevocably in love with you." Tears spilled onto Rebecca's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "With all my heart, yes." They were married in the spring of 1875, beneath the apple trees Catherine had planted years before, now blossoming white against the blue Montana sky. William stood proudly at Nathan's side, appointed best man, with all the solemnity his 7 years could muster. Emma scattered flower petals with concentrated precision, her face alight with joy. As they spoke their vows, Nathan felt Catherine's presence not as a shadow or a ghost, but as a blessing, a reminder that love was never truly lost, only transformed. That night, holding Rebecca in his arms, Nathan whispered, "Thank you for finding me in that blizzard." She laughed softly. "I think it was you who found us." "Perhaps we found each other," he suggested, "exactly when we needed to." Years passed, seasons turning in their eternal cycle. The ranch prospered under their joint care, expanding to become one of the most successful operations in the territory. William grew tall and strong, apprenticing with Nathan in all aspects of ranching, his natural affinity for horses developing into genuine skill. Emma blossomed into a thoughtful young woman with her mother's determination and Nathan's quiet strength. And in 1876, the family welcomed a new addition, a son they named James Catherine Ingram, honoring those they had loved and lost while celebrating the new life they had built together. On quiet evenings, Nathan would sometimes visit the small cemetery on the edge of their property, tending Catherine's grave with care. But the crushing grief that had once been his only companion had softened into gentle remembrance. He would return to the house, to Rebecca's embrace, to children's laughter, to the life he had never expected to find again. One summer evening in 1882, as they sat together on the porch watching their children play in the golden light, Rebecca leaned her head against Nathan's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never meeting?" she asked. "If that blizzard hadn't blown in when it did, if you hadn't heard Emma crying." Nathan tightened his arm around her shoulders. "I used to think Catherine's death was the end of my story," he said thoughtfully. "Now I understand it was just a chapter, painful, yes, but not the whole book." Rebecca smiled up at him, the years having only deepened the connection between them. "I'm grateful for every page we've written together, and all the pages yet to come," Nathan replied, his heart full with the knowledge that in opening his door to a starving widow and her children on that stormy night, he had also opened the door to his own salvation, finding in their need and in Rebecca's love the courage to live again.